Hey, listen up. This is the updated 2023 BMW 3 Series, specifically in M340i trim with rear-wheel drive. Now, in typical BMW cadence, they've refreshed the 3 Series, giving the exterior an updated look and the interior as well, but one additional notable difference underneath the hood that I'm really interested in testing out. So let's explore this refreshed LCI 3 Series and see what it's all about.
So the BMW 3 Series has been around for almost 5 decades now, and it continues to be the benchmark if you're looking for a sporty 4-door sedan with do-it-all capabilities that also blends in luxury, style, and sport all into one package. When most manufacturers continue to shift focus to SUVs and EV, BMW continues to build a 3 Series that remains somewhat close to the original formula.
So speaking of formulas, BMW has one for updating or refreshing their cars. So release a new model and give it a little makeover 3 or 4 years down the road. So let's jump into that makeover, starting out with the interior, and the highlight change is the curved widescreen display. It's got 2 screens, 12.3 inches acting as your gauge cluster, and the highlight of it all, a 14.9-inch infotainment screen which is running BMW's latest 8th generation iDrive system. I saw this system for the first time in the M2 and I'm still a little mixed about it. Now it takes a little bit to get used to it because there's a lot coming at you right at the home screen, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I just feel like there's some opportunity here to make it look simpler graphically at least. Otherwise, I think it's okay.
Next, another change that is somewhat being overlooked is the transmission controller. Prior to the refresh, there was a traditional looking knob style shifter that's been replaced with this toggle switch, which looks more fitted to drive mode selector in my opinion, but hey, Porsche did the same thing in the 911, going with a smaller shifter for the PDK.
So as a result of these highlighted changes, the interior of the refreshed 3 Series is a lot simpler, it's a lot cleaner and modern looking. The air conditioning vents are even slimmer. There's a massive reduction in buttons. All you've got is this volume controller and a couple other infrequently used buttons. And beyond it just being cleaned up, now the climate control system is completely integrated into the infotainment screen. So the good thing about the climate menu is that there's a dedicated icon that makes it easy to access, and you can even control it using your voice. But I know this is going to upset some folks because there is a preference for having physical buttons specifically for the climate control system.
Rounding off the interior, a quick look at the back seats. At 5'11", I fit back there just fine. I've got a good amount of leg and headroom, a nice armrest with cup holders, and a third climate control zone with 2 USB Type-C outlets.
So now let's talk about the engine. So this is the familiar 3-liter turbocharged inline 6-cylinder from BMW. It generates 382 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque, which is basically the same as what you would have gotten in the pre-refresh. The difference here with the update is that BMW has attached a 48-volt mild hybrid battery to this configuration. I'll tell you more about that here in just a second, but it's made it to an 8-speed automatic transmission, and unfortunately you can't get a manual in the non-M versions. You have to upgrade to the M3 or the M4, but gratefully, you do have a choice at drive configurations. So you can either get a rear-wheel drive just like this car, or upgrade to a X-Drive all-wheel drive system. And speaking of X-Drive, it does accelerate a little faster, 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds and 4.4 seconds in the rear-wheel drive.
Now going back to the 48-volt battery, BMW says it offers an electric boost effect which results in sharper engine response and also refines the automatic start-stop feature. But a couple other items: the M340 tips the scales at 3,834 pounds in the rear-wheel drive model. It comes standard with M Sport brakes, an M Sport differential, and M Sport suspension. You can even option in adaptive shocks if you wanted to, something that's a great option for those looking to have the ability to adjust their suspension feel. Now with all that out of the way, let's take this thing on the road and see what it feels like behind the wheel.
So I'm inside the car now. Let's see how it drives. Start-stop here next to the transmission shifter. Starts up with a decent exhaust note. Speaking of exhaust note, in comfort mode, Now Sport and Sport Plus. There's a little bit of a pop as the engine revs are coming down around the 3,000-4,000 range, and it's the same thing when you're driving, so it actually gives it a little bit more engagement than you would expect in the regular 3 Series. Of course, I know this is still the M340i, but nonetheless, let's go for it. So car is in Sport Plus individual mode, and in this car it means that everything is in Sport Plus. So that's what I've done with the individual. Transmission is now in Sport as well. We shift it down to 1, manual mode, and let's go. So this is a really fast car. It feels all of that 382 horsepower. It feels really nice. Braking feedback is good as well. Body roll, it's pretty good. I would say you can definitely feel the weight in the corners. The weight transfer is good as well, but still, considering that this is on the fixed suspension, I would venture to say that there's a little bit more room here for that adaptive shock, and I would imagine there's a little bit more stiffness here. We get by the traffic, and oh yeah, it hugs nicely. Maybe the seat needs a little bit more bolstering because this thing has great cornering ability. Wow, look at this thing go. Biker, slow down. All right. Now, as far as the speed goes in this thing, this is super fast, and oh man, it delivers power really nicely. And the turbo lag by that mild hybrid setup, I could feel very little to no turbo lag here. Of course, I'm driving in the upper rev range, but it feels plenty linear and very quick. I like the heads-up display in this car, and the exhaust note, as I was mentioning, it is slightly pumped in, but it sounds good. Man, this thing is really sporty. Woo, yeah, okay, brake, I was a big number. Brakes are really good here. Stops it, plenty of braking power. And we come to a stop sign here, or a stop light, and it's giving me the ability to just mash it from a stop. But this is really sporty. All right, let's go. Rear wheel drive, getting a little loose back there. But this is such an easy car to drive fast. Man, it really pulls. And if you're thinking about speed, this thing is really quick and delivers a lot of exhilaration. You really get pushed into your seat, and the inline 6-cylinder experience is very strong in this car. So let me switch over into comfort mode now, because I've got some traffic in front of me, and when I get the opportunity to, I'll switch it back and we'll do a little bit more enthusiast driving. But let me tell you about the rest of this thing. So the transmission is good, 8-speed automatic. If you've driven a BMW before, it's as you would expect. The shifts are nice and crisp, whether you're driving in this type of environment or whether you're driving in the city. Really nice, effortless, good automatic transmission. Then the brake, the M Sport brakes are really good as well. There's a lot of bite right at the top of the pedal. Of course, it's not M3, M4 levels of braking, but nonetheless, it does give you an adequate and as expected amount of braking power for this type of car and this type of power level. Now, the suspension, as I was mentioning while I was driving a little bit harder back there, this feels good on the base suspension with the fixed springs and the fixed shocks. This is good. It feels properly sporty and gives it a good dual nature capability. So in this setting, it's great. It provides wonderful feedback, and it's adequately dampened, or I guess stiff for the lack of a better term. And then when you drive around in the city, it is comfortable and would be good as a daily driver as well. Now, I mentioned earlier that I would be curious to see how this thing rides on the adaptive shocks. Now, I'm a big fan of adaptive shocks, and they basically transform a lot of cars, and I sense that there's a little bit more comfort that could be dialed into this thing, because when I jumped in, I was like, oh wow, this doesn't feel like a normal 3 Series or a 3 Series by my expectations. So I wonder if there's a little bit more bandwidth in the adaptive shock, to where when you're driving in comfort mode, it's a little bit more comfortable than this, and when you're driving in sport mode, it can get really stiff and a lot sportier than this. And that being a $500 option, I think blindly I would probably check it, considering the driving feedback that I'm getting here. Now, switching over into the steering, this is actually the point that, or the dynamic of this car that really surprised me, and it's good and somewhat not so good. So the good about it is that in this driving setting, when I'm in sport mode, it's nice. It feels good. It gives me good feedback. It's got a good amount of weight in it. When you're driving sporty, you don't want it to be a jello steering wheel, and I think it's good. Of course, as most modern BMWs, it's not the best with feedback, but it's adequate considering this is still a non-full M car, like an M3, so it's pretty good. Now, let me pull over here for a second and tell you about the other part that is a little concerning to me. So, the concerning part is from a daily standpoint. So, the feedback here is very, very heavy when you're driving it in the city. So whether in comfort mode or whether in sport mode, the steering wheel is very, very weighted and requires a lot of effort to turn. It's the first thing you'll notice when you jump into the M340i is this feel. So if you're somebody who likes a lot of weight, and for you to really feel that you're turning the steering wheel, this is going to be right up your alley. If you're somebody who likes a looser steering wheel, even in comfort mode, this is probably a little too weighted for your taste. So overall, I do like this 3 Series. This is actually the first time I've driven the M340i. I've driven the M3 and the M4 before, and this is kind of really that halfway point. Of course, it's meant to be there, and I think BMW has really achieved it nicely by slotting it in between the 330 and the M3, and with the price point and the amount of horsepower and the acceleration and the fact that you can get it in all-wheel drive and basically drive it in every single setting. I think it's a fantastic car. The only caveat that, as I mentioned, kind of surprised me was the steering feedback, so keep that in mind. Make sure you take it for a drive before you make a buying decision. So that's the updated BMW 3 Series. It's a great car, but more importantly, keeps the 3 Series formula alive. It's sporty, it's practical, it's got great technology on the interior, and it's still available with a sweet inline 6-cylinder engine. Sure, the manual transmission may be gone, but it's still a fun, easy car to drive that any enthusiast can buy and drive as their only car. Why? Because it's good on a daily basis, and its performance can get your blood pumping because it's practically nipping right at the heels of the M3. So that's all I've got. If you've got any questions, please leave me a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram @DriveSteady. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.